Hi, everyone. Welcome to our weekly news roundup. We are joined here with Joss, Sylvia, and me, Ariane. So just a brief summary of what we're going to discuss today. We're going to talk about an activist judge in Florida. We're going to talk about Title IX legislation being blocked by the courts. We are going to talk about
North Dakota.
holding a ban on youth gender medicalization, an update on the California Senate in regards to AB 1955. We have a Leah Thomas related update. We also have some story to tell about declining in public support for sex change on birth certificates in the UK. We're also going to update the Wyoming sorority case, as well as segue that into an interesting thing that happened with Judith Butler in San Francisco. And we have some very weird stories about cervixes in Canada and politically incorrect language about that, and some stories that relate to free speech in Massachusetts, and also skid marks in Spokane. And finally, we'll end with a wonderful little story about a Vietnam vet coming out. So in the meantime, Joss, we'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Ariane. So I'm going to start with our activist judge in Florida. Judge Robert L. Hinkle of the Federal District Court in Tallahassee sided with advocacy groups HRC, NCLR, GLAAD, and private law firms, along with 3 families who said that the law stripped them of their parents' rights to make medical decisions for their transgender children. In a 105-page order, Judge Hinkle said that gender identity is real and that a quote-unquote widely accepted standard of care includes puberty blockers and hormone treatments, and that Florida unlawfully banned these. Quote, the state of Florida can regulate as needed but cannot flatly deny transgender individuals safe and effective medical treatment with medications routinely provided to others with the state's full approval, so long as the purpose is not to support the patient's transgender identity, Hinkle wrote. The law passed by Republican lawmakers and signed by Ron DeSantis in May 2023 barred doctors and nurses from prescribing or administering transition-related medication to those under 18 and exposed medical providers to criminal liability and professional discipline if they did so, among other provisions. Judge Hinkle's ruling on Tuesday also invalidated a part of the law that said transition care for adults may not be prescribed, administered, or performed except by a physician. That paves the way for nurse practitioners, physician assistants, and other medical professionals to provide such care. He also struck down a provision requiring adults seeking transition care to meet in person with a doctor prior to starting treatment. A Texas judge blocked the Title IX changes. U.S. District Judge Reed O'Connor ruled that the Biden administration failed to follow the proper procedures to enact changes to Title IX. Further, Judge O'Connor ruled that the Biden administration improperly attempted to rewrite a federal law barring sex discrimination by applying it to LGBTQ students, and that the guidance issued by the U.S. Department of Education was invalid because the agency lacked the power to adopt it and that it could not be enforced in Texas. Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton sued the Department of Education in 2023 for issuing, quote, arbitrary and capricious guidance that unlawfully extended Title IX to include sexual orientation and gender identity as protected classes. This would have forced Texas schools and universities to allow biological males to use women's restrooms, locker rooms, and other sex-specific spaces. Any Texas school refusing to follow the mandate risks losing federal education funding. A federal court vacated the unlawful guidance nationwide and issued a permanent injunction against its enforcement against Texas and its schools. This ruling ensures that no school district in the state of Texas will have to comply with the Biden administration's interpretation of Title IX as including gender identity requirements, including allowing men into women's restrooms or locker rooms or sports teams, or requiring students or teachers to use pronouns based on gender identity rather than biological sex. An education department spokesperson in a statement said it crafted the rule, quote, to give complete effect to the Title IX statutory guarantee that no person experiences sex discrimination in federally funded education, end quote. Similarly, in a preliminary injunction granted Thursday, U.S. District Judge Terry A. Doherty called the new rule an abuse of power and a threat to democracy. He also ordered a block to the rule in Louisiana, which filed a challenge to the rule in April, and in Mississippi, Montana, and Idaho, which joined in the suit. Finally, I'd like to talk about North Dakota. So a North Dakota judge opposed ban on youth gender medicalization. South Central Judicial District Judge Jackson Lofgren declined to issue a preliminary injunction blocking the ban while a lawsuit against it is heard. Minors undergoing medicalization prior to April 2023 can continue gender treatments. The ban passed the North Dakota House and Senate with veto-proof majorities, and it was signed into law by Governor Doug Burgum. The measure makes it a felony to perform gender surgeries on minors and a misdemeanor to prescribe hormones or puberty blockers. The penalty for the felony charge would be a prison term of up to 10 years in prison and a $20,000 fine. For the misdemeanor, it would be 360 days in prison and a $3,000 fine. So the ban is upheld while this is in trial. Ariane, I'd like to toss it back to you.
Thank you, Joss. So first, in California, on June 13th, the California State Senate passed AB 1955. This bill would ban schools from requiring that teachers and administrators disclose information about their students' sexual orientation, gender identity, or preferred pronouns. And the bill also requires that the State Department of Education develop resources to increase support for quote-unquote LGBTQ pupils. So this is something that a lot of parents, advocates, a lot of ROGD parents are very upset about, because such a law, if signed into law, would make it easier for schools to sort of secretly trans students. It's no surprise that it passed, however, because of the Democratic supermajority. Turning to the world of swimming, Leah Thomas loses his case against World Aquatics. Thomas had argued that World Aquatics policy was discriminatory against transgender people because the World Aquatics current policy only allows trans-identified males to compete in the female category if they transitioned before age 12 or before they reached the Tanner stage 2 of puberty. However, the Court of Arbitration of Sport argued that Thomas lacks the standing for his challenge. So that means that Thomas will not be eligible to compete as a woman in the 2024 Olympics and other elite swimming events. Turning now to the UK, there was recently a British social attitudes survey done, which found that support for allowing changing legal sex on birth certificates is dropping and has particularly dropped since 2016. In 2016, 58% of survey respondents in the UK supported allowing people to legally change their sex on birth certificates, and only 22% disagreed. But by 2024, only 24% of the UK population agrees that people should be allowed to legally change sex on birth certificates, while 50% opposes it and the rest are undecided. So big change in public opinion is going on in the UK. Now, back here in the US, we have previously been talking about the case of the Wyoming sorority, where there have been 6 Wyoming sorority sisters that have sued their sorority, Kappa Kappa Gamma, because Kappa Gamma Gamma had a policy that admitted a trans-identified male, Artemis Langford, as a member. And the sisters argued that by admitting trans-identified males as members, the leaders of the sorority had in effect changed their bylaws, which ostensibly were supposed to only allow women as members. However, on June 12th, the 6 sorority sisters lost their case in federal court. The federal court argued that the sorority sisters had not exhausted their options for appeal in the district court, and hence the federal court does not have the jurisdiction to rule on this case. And it's not clear if the lawyers representing the sisters will continue with further legal options. Now, I think this is an important case to follow because the significance of allowing single-sex spaces is very important for LGBT people. And I would just like to relate a story that happened yesterday. Judith Butler came to speak in San Francisco, and I was actually there. I saw the talk, and one of my colleagues there Amanda Kovatana asked Judith Butler in the Q&A, well, if gender is so liberating for women, do I, as a lesbian, have a right to have spaces without a penis? And Judith Butler's response was, well, you do at home, unless you have a son at home. So this whole question of whether or not single-sex spaces are allowed can have some pretty devastating impacts for lesbians who are used to organizing in such a way where they have women-only spaces. So I think it's important to keep an eye on these sorts of situations. And I'd also like to add one other kind of LOL story. The Canadian Cancer Society issued a disclaimer recently for using the term cervix on its webpage, saying that the word cervix could antagonize trans men and non-binary people who may prefer instead to use the term front hole. So on that note, I'll take it to you, Sylvia.
Yeah, more on the free speech front. A boy by the name of Liam Morrison in Middleborough, Massachusetts, has lost his suit against the Middleborough Public School. For those who are unaware, this young boy wore a t-shirt that said there are only two genders. Of course, I assume he is talking about sex, but he's using gender interchangeably with biological sex. He wore a shirt that said there are only two genders, and he was barred from wearing that shirt to school. And so then he went and did a lawsuit against the school district and lost. They appealed and now lost the appeal. His lawyers argued that this is an infringement of free speech, that students don't lose free speech by walking into school. The school's argument was, well, we have the right to limit student speech if there is, quote, a material disruption of learning due to a, quote, negative psychological impact, end quote. So because his shirt did undue psychological impact to fellow students, he's not allowed to wear that shirt. And the lawyers for the district won by citing the case in 1969, where the US Supreme Court favored that students had a right to wear black armbands to school in protest of the Vietnam War. This was Tinker versus Des Moines. And the reason that they were allowed to wear those black armbands is because the black armbands did not, quote, material disrupt classwork or involve substantial disorder or invasion of the rights of others, end quote. The ruling concluded that the school administrators were well within their discretion to conclude that the message on Morrison's t-shirt may communicate that only two gender identities, male and female, are valid and the others are invalid or non-existent. So there you have it. Now on to the skid marks, not of the underwear kind, but on the road. A group of teenage boys, roughly 19, are charged with a felony for leaving skid marks on a newly painted pride flag crosswalk. They allegedly yelled, "F you, bundle of sticks." Obviously, the bundle of sticks is a slang slur for gay men, but we don't want to say it online. So F you, you, and left skid marks. Now that does sound awful until you see that the skid marks in question, I don't know if we can get an image of it on the screen, pretty minuscule. Yeah. Horrible, absolutely horrible. On the street, skid marks, very clearly left there maliciously. So the unfortunate timing of this is that in Spokane, Washington, on, I believe it was June 6th, a law went into practice where it is now considered a felony to deface public works. So there's a new Washington state law making it a hate crime to deface a public installations with the intent of intimidating a protected group. This went into effect on June 6th. So I guess we will be following this court case to see if the teenagers' lawyers can prove they were not trying to intimidate or be disrespectful. They were simply riding their bikes. And then when they were chastised for it, they did maybe say some gay charged slurs. But it's unclear whether or not the skid marks were meant to be hateful or if they were just scootering. Interestingly, Lime scooters, which was the scoots that were being used, have now implemented a policy where their scooters will not ride over any Pride installation on the ground. Obviously, scooters can't go in the sky or anything, but so just if you're riding a Lime scooter, make sure that you don't drive over any rainbows because the scooters will turn off. So hopefully there's no train tracks painted rainbow otherwise. On a more uplifting note, bittersweetly, a Vietnam veteran passed away. It was June 1st. And he was a highly decorated military officer, a colonel. His name is Colonel Edward Thomas Ryan. He was a retired firefighter. He has, like I said, highly decorated. He, for example, had the Defense of Liberty Medal for his work helping with the aftermath of 9/11. He has the National Defense Service Medal, Conspicuous Service Medal. He was a very dedicated military officer. And in his obituary, he came out as gay and said, quote, "I was gay all my life, through grade school, through high school, through college, through life." He also revealed that he had been in a long-term loving and caring relationship with another man that he will now be buried next to. After years of keeping his sexual orientation hidden, he apologized and said, "I am sorry," it said in his obituary, "I am sorry for not having the courage to come out as gay. I was afraid of being ostracized by friends, family, and coworkers. Now that my secret is known, I'll forever rest in peace." It's bittersweet. His niece said that she and many in her family knew already, but that they respected his privacy and didn't ask questions and knew who his partner was, but just respected his wishes to remain private about it. And now that he's come out in his obituary, hopefully he's found that peace. So I feel like that's a more uplifting story, bittersweet Pride Month. The reason why we have Pride is so that men like him can rest in peace before they're resting. I have a question for Judith Butler. Does she think that the countries where women need to have a male escort in order to be in public spheres, is that progressive in her mind? Because it's basically saying there must always be, I mean, I guess men don't need to have women escorts, but that with women, they can't escape the penis at home in the public sphere. So is that in her mind, is that true gender equality?
Well, you know what her answer would be? It would be, you shouldn't judge people by their body parts.
Oh, okay. I'll just ignore the statistics then of violence against women. And it's just a crapshoot. I don't know. My instincts of recognizing people's sex differences are just hardwired, but I will do my best to unlearn that, Butler.
Mm-hmm. I actually had a question about the whole school thing. I mean, where do we draw the line between what's allowed and what's not allowed with school expression? I remember we had a whole debate about this when I was in high school, and some people didn't like how teachers would have like certain buttons or slogans or something, but
Well, it's funny you say that because I had a science teacher and I grew up in a state that is in the Bible Belt of the United States. And this science teacher would wear a shirt that said, "Teach the controversy." And it was an image of the devil burying dinosaur bones, basically implying that the dinosaur bones are only there. The dinosaur fossils are only there because the devils put them there. And, you know, he's this evil science teacher teaching us the conspiracy and the fact that this science teacher wore that shirt to class on casual Fridays, where there were absolutely ultra Christian students. I haven't heard of any students complaining about that. And maybe it's because he was a teacher and it's unfair power dynamics, but I think, you know, people just need to get a little thicker skin, especially when there's no inherent value being played. Like, I don't know, I guess it could be argued that there's only two genders shirts is implying that all other gender identities don't exist. Therefore, your supposed gender identity isn't real and I don't validate you, but I don't. Is that hate speech to not validate someone's belief? Do I have to validate Christians' belief that Christ is king or whatever they say, even if that's not my belief? Genuine question.
Yeah, I don't know. And that also segues back to the whole Florida thing about the judge in Florida who literally ruled that gender identity is real. Is that basically making a statement of faith?
Seems like a very faith-based statement, in my opinion.
Well, it's hard because you have people pointing to the experts to be like, well, I'm only saying I'm following the science, and this, you know, like WPATH says this, excuse me, these are the standards of care, and we're going to follow those and we trust the experts. But what happens if the experts are ideologically captured? And what if the experts are activists first and are quelling any dissenting voice? Can you trust those experts? I don't.
In the Florida case, one of the troubling aspects was the witness for the state, and this was also in the same witness for Arkansas. And unfortunately, it was Dr. Stephen Levine, and he really just made some contradictory statements that were faith-based statements, and it undermined the state's case. So they had this one witness that really undermined the case, and to Florida's fault on this, he did it in Arkansas. So they should have maybe sought someone else to be there. You know, and now we've had the cash review come out. This was all predated. Their original cases about this predated the cash review being released. But yeah, like the notion that these are sound medical treatments. In the case of Hinkle, he was equating the off-brand or off-prescription use of puberty blockers for kids with it being used for other people for other reasons, as if it were a safe treatment when we know factually that it's not. So there's a lot of faith-based and captured thinking in these decisions. In fact, he mentioned that the people who had brought the case, they admitted that they were trans. So obviously it must be true because they had admitted it. So it's just taking that on face value. And unfortunately, the plaintiffs had a lot of really good witnesses that were taken at face value by a judge who was appointed by Clinton in '96.
I think in a lot of these cases and lawsuits against pushing back against the gender ideology, they lack really important voices, such as lesbians, specifically, I'd say feminist lesbians or lesbians that have been in this fight, and bisexual women, same-sex attracted women, who understand the opposing arguments so well that maybe perhaps at one point they believed in them and then have now come out the other side. Because I think you have a lot of these lawyers or just laymen people who are trying to push back, and they don't entirely understand what they're up against and what sort of arguments they're going to be faced. So I think if they could have more based LGB people come forward and say, listen, we know these arguments, we understand what they're going to come at you with. Like, you might not like me if you're Christian, but listen to this lesbian, because I'm going to tell you this is what they're going to say to you, and this is what, you know, say biological sex, leave gender out of it, you know, talk about the importance of single sex spaces. Like, I think that there's an allyship, for lack of a better term, that's really being missed out.
I agree. And that's why we're here as an organization, to try to offer some of those voices. And that's why I was so happy when Amanda Kovatana talked down to Judith Butler like that, because Judith Butler was just, most of the talk was mostly talking about it being a right-wing conspiracy against gender. And they really do not, people like Judith Butler really do not want to acknowledge the more lesbian and more feminist oriented arguments. And on that note, thank you all for listening to this week's weekly news roundup, and we hope to see you again next week. Goodbye.